Welcome to episode 52 of Lucretius Today. I'm your host Cassius, and together with my panelists from the EpicureanFriends.com forum, we'll walk you through the 6 books of Lucretius's poem and discuss how Epicurean philosophy can apply to you today. Be aware that none of us are professional philosophers, and everyone here is a self-taught Epicurean. We encourage you to study Epicurus for yourself, and we suggest the best place to start is the book Epicurus and His Philosophy by Canadian professor Norman DeWitt. For anyone who is not familiar with our podcast, please check back to episode 1 for a discussion of our goals and our ground rules. If you have any question about that, please be sure to contact us at EpicureanFriends.com for more information. In today's episode, we're in Book 4 of the poem, and we start with Latin text 230 and go to approximately 323. Now let's join the discussion with Elaine reading today's text.
Besides, since any figure we feel with our hands in the dark, we know to be the same we before saw by day, and in the clearest light, the touch and sight must needs be moved by the same cause. And therefore, if we feel a quadrangular figure and distinguish its shape in the dark, what can present that shape to us in the light but its quadrangular image? The cause, therefore, of our sight must arise from the images, nor indeed can we distinguish anything without them. Now these images I'm speaking of are carried about every way, and are thrown off and scattered on all sides. And therefore it is, since with our eyes alone we are able to see, that which way soever we turn our eyes, the objects strike upon them in their proper form and color. The image likewise is the cause that we discover, and takes care to satisfy us at what distance bodies are removed from us. For as soon as it is emitted, it instantly thrusts forward and drives on the air that is placed between itself and the sight. This stream of air then glides to the eye, and as it were grates gently upon the ball, and so passes through. Hence it is that we perceive how far things are distant from our sight. For the more air there is that is driven before the image, and the longer the stream of it that rubs upon the ball, the longer the interval of space between the object and the eye must be allowed to be. All this is done with the utmost celerity, for we see what the object is and know its distance in the same instance. Nor are we to think it at all strange in this case that the objects may be perfectly seen, and yet the images that singly strike the eye cannot themselves be discovered. For when the wind blows gently upon us, and its sharp cold pierces our bodies, we cannot distinguish the several particles of wind or cold that so affect us, but we are sensible of their whole strength together. We perceive their blows laid upon our bodies as if something were beating us, and made us feel the effects of its outward force upon us. And so when we strike a stone with our fingers, we touch the surface and outmost color of the stone. But then we feel nothing of the color or surface by our touch. We perceive no more than the hardness of the stone that lies within. And now learn why the image is always seen beyond the glass. For it certainly appears at a remote distance from us. For instance, when you are placed in an inner room and things are seen at a distance from you, when the door is open and gives you a clear prospect and allows you plainly to discover any object without, your sight in this case is formed, as I may say, by a double air. The air that lies within the door is the first, then the door is placed in the middle between, and then the light that without that rubs gently upon the eye, this is the other air, and at length the object is discovered. So when the image of the glass first flies off, as it makes a passage to our sight, it strikes forward and drives in the air that lies between itself and the eye, so that we feel all this interjacent air before we see anything of the glass. But when we discover the glass, the image that is emitted from us instantly flies to it, and being reflected and sent back, returns again to our sight, and forces the air that is before it, which is the reason that we perceive this interjacent air before the image that is seen by us. Now when two airs are driven, the image of the glass forcing on one, and the image reflected another, The interval must of necessity be more extended and even doubled. Hence it is that images appear not in the surface of the glass, but beyond it. And therefore we are not to wonder at all that the images of things reflected to our sight from the surface of a smooth glass by means of a double air, because it appears plainly that they are so. But more, that the part of the body that is the right side appears in the glass to be the left, because the image, when it strikes upon the surface of the glass, is not reflected again unchanged, but is turned a different way about. For instance, take a mask made of clay before it is dry and dash it against a pillar or beam. If it preserves its figure entire and appears inverted only so that the face fills up the hollow, the event will be that the right eye will now be the left, and the left the right. And then it may be contrived that the image shall pass from one glass into another, so that 5 or 6 images shall be reflected at once. And objects that are placed backwards in the inward part of the house, let them be ever so much out of sight, and the turnings ever so crooked, they may be drawn out through the winding passages, and by the placing of so many glasses be perfectly discovered. The image may be so transferred from one glass into another that it will change its left into its right, but when it is again reflected from the second glass into the third, it will resume its left part again and will continue to change in the same manner as it passes into all the glasses that follow. But in glasses joined together in the convex figure of a pillar, the side of the image reflected is returned so that the right part of the image answers to the right of the object or a thing seen, either because the image being transferred from one glass into another is reflected twice, or that the image when it comes to us is turned about. For that the face is turned about as it passes backwards, we learn from the figure of the glass. Besides, you would believe that the image moves with us and attends all our steps and imitates our gestures, because when you retire from any part of the glass, the image cannot be reflected from that part. For nature ordains that all images that are emitted from bodies should be returned and reflected by equal angles.
Elaine, thank you for reading 100 lines of the driest material we've probably ever read in the book. If someone were to pick up this book at this passage and start reading this material, they would throw it down as some of the most useless things they could possibly have read. So it's going to be up to us to get through this and relate it to reality. Go ahead.
It's funny to me that you have that reaction.
I do.
Yeah, I'm
Why?
curious.
Tell me your reaction.
Well, it's more of his attempt to understand what he's seeing, what he's observing, and to come up with explanations, which are not right, but it's fascinating to me the way his mind works. I don't find it drier than the other part, so I'm wondering why it strikes you that way.
I think I lost it at double air.
You what?
I think I lost it at double air.
The double air. That was cool.
What do you think that means, Charles?
This is when you are look at the mirror, no? So then you have the air between the air counts twice, no? From between your eye to the mirror and back to the eye, no? So that's why it's a double air.
That's what
so that one. It just that the theory comes up that the light is pushing the air, and from that pressure of the air we can sense the distance. That is nonsense. But
it's creative nonsense.
For the time, it probably made a lot of sense.
Yeah. But the detail of the observation is again striking, no? So that at tiny details he looks at and tries them to put in a context of a theory which somehow makes sense, no? Within primitive atomism. No?
Right. So I had a thought about this very first passage where he's talking about being able to distinguish a shape without looking at it. And which is a specific type of neurologic ability. Some people can lose that, where they'll reach into a bag and feel of an object and they're not able to understand its shape with their hands. It's hard to imagine happening.
Isn't there a similar thing with people who who are blind or regain their sight and they can't recognize images? or not
Yes.
images, but objects.
The shapes and the three, how to interpret the 3D. So I have a pediatric perspective on this. You know that stage that young babies go through where they want to put everything in their mouths?
Mm-hmm.
If you watch them real closely, they will kind of hold it out right in front of their face and look at it and put it in their mouth and mouth it and then look at it and mouth it. Parents think they're teething, but the hypothesis is what they're doing may be forming a correlation between vision, 3D vision, and shape, and that the mouth, not only the hands, is a great way to feel the shapes of objects in a lot of detail, because our mouth, we have a lot of sensory nerve endings, and so they put this square or cube block, maybe in their mouth and feel all the edges with their tongues, and then they take it out and they look at it, and they're making these building these connections so that they really understand what it is they're seeing because they felt it. I just think that's fascinating.
Well, I agree that it's fascinating too, despite what I said a few minutes ago. We'll keep going then, Elaine. Before I then pull back to some of the more general comments I wanted to make today, let's continue with the details here that you think are particularly interesting.
Well,
Anything
all
else?
this about the mirrors, I agree with Martin. I mean, it's just he really had so many observations and was trying to come up with a way to put them together, even though it was wrong. It's just fascinating. But when he starts talking about all the different mirrors, I have a good friend, one of my closest friends, who has the most hilarious sense of humor with her decorating. She has a beautiful house with all sorts of interesting objects, but she also has these little humor bits. And she got this idea to decorate her fairly small guest bathroom with all sorts of mirrors. It has large, small, beautiful little ornate mirrors. I've never seen so many mirrors in one little room. And so your image in the bathroom it's everywhere, and it's being reflected from one mirror to another. And this is a really interesting experience. And I thought about her bathroom when he was talking about all these mirrors and things being reflected between them. Anyway, so just a little bit of humor there. Decorating idea for any of y'all who want to play around.
Will the text from this section be plastered on the wall in that room?
Yes, it should be. Oh, that's a great idea.
Well, I have to admit that I've always found it fascinating. I guess I think about it more in terms of the camera aimed at a television screen, more so than I do just mirrors stacked together. But the effect of bouncing things back and forth, what am I trying to describe? I don't know there's a better way of saying it than what I just said, but the apparently like infinite regress of images bouncing back and forth. I think you can do that with a mirror and not just with a camera and a screen, right? When you point the camera at the screen and you start seeing yourself in the ever smaller images.
Oh, yeah. That reminds me of Colbert, that joke that he used to play on his show with all the pictures of himself and the reflections. And yeah, I don't know. Martin, what's the name of it? Does that have a name, doing that?
Oh, I don't know that. But we had in our bathroom, we had two opposite mirrors, so you could see yourself practically in infinite number of times.
Yeah.
When you're getting smaller and further away, so not really infinite, but it's a not limited series of your images.
Yeah, it's humorous to me. I wonder if Lucretius thought it was kind of funny.
Yeah, certainly. No, I mean, the way he describes it, so it's done in a playful way.
Yeah, sounds like it to me. So now is your feeling of dryness different?
A little bit. if I were having to, like I say, explain this to somebody who just started in on this podcast, I'd have to relate it back to something more general. But that's the problem. That's part of the deal is you just can't reduce everything to a high level abstraction. You've got to deal with details and explanations for why you come up with your conclusions. And this is one of those many details that he works through. All right. Well, I can start to begin to transition. Once we get to next week, we'll start to draw some more conclusions out of this. But one of the things that I posted as a separate post, did it on the Facebook page as well, was that just down the page or series of pages, he starts talking about shadows. And he talks about what a shadow might be and whether the light is being obscured, light from the sun is being obscured or whatever. And he makes this statement that I think is part of what brings it all home. He says, but in this case, we are not in the least to allow that the eyes are deceived. It is their business to discover only where the light and the shade are, but to determine nothing whether the light be the same or the shadow be the same that moves from one place to another, or whether it be as we explained above. It is the office of the mind and judgment to distinguish this. For the eyes can know nothing of the nature of things, and therefore you're not to impute to them the failures of the mind. I think you could relate that to what we're talking about with these reflections as well. You see things and you have different theories about how these reflections are working. The eyes aren't going to give you the answer as to how things work, and they're not going to give you a theory. They're going to give you observations from which you can construct an understanding, but the eyes don't do the understanding. For example, the very last statement that Elaine read today. Besides, you would believe that the image moves with us and attends all our steps and imitates our gestures, because when you retire from any part of the glass, the image can't be reflected from that part. For nature ordains that all images that are emitted from bodies should be returned and reflected by equal angles. Well, the conclusion that nature ordains that all images are emitted from bodies should be returned and reflected by equal angles is a conclusion, is an abstraction. And it may be right, it may be wrong, but only the eyes can tell us whether it's right or wrong. Elaine.
Well, okay, so my thoughts are, these days, I don't really conceive of the nervous system as being so clearly separable. So obviously, the retina is not the prefrontal cortex, but the peripheral nervous system and the sense organs, without those, the brain wouldn't have anything to work with, with nothing. If you had no senses at all, not even touch, I don't know what you would think about. I don't know what thinking would be. And you can do the same thing within the brain too, that you can do between the brain and the eye. So you could say, well, let's say you have a stroke and you lose your mathematical abilities, or you can understand language, but you can't produce it. You see there, so you can have a deficit in any part of the immune system. So I was talking about the functions of the brain are as specific, and you could talk about them separately and how they work together as much as between the brain and the retina. So it gives you options how you want to divide the nervous system and talk about it. So in one way, you could talk about the sense of sight as being the combination of the eye, the optic nerve, to the visual cortex. And then, how we interpret it is those are other functions of the brain. But the visual cortex does some of that automatically because of pattern recognition and ability to integrate vision with our other senses, like our tactile sense. So it's a little bit more complicated, I guess I'm trying to say, than the way it's presented here. But it's not wrong to say one part of the nervous system can't do the job of the entire nervous system, and that our ability to understand things really requires multiple parts of the nervous system, not just one, and definitely not just an eyeball.
Martin or Charles, you guys have anything right now?
No.
Okay, well, since Elaine just mentioned the eyeball, let me pull out a section from the DeWitt book that I think is maybe helpful for putting some of it in perspective. Let me just read a paragraph or two. On page 204, under a subsection entitled Vision, DeWitt says this. He says, in his explanation of vision, Epicurus sets himself in opposition to both Democritus and Plato. The latter had thought of the eyes as discharging little beams of light, which, being homogeneous with the light of day, were capable of revealing the shapes and colors of external objects and of conveying the impressions of them back to the consciousness of the observer. The essential part of this theory is the homogeneity of the beam extending between eye and object, which ensures that red will be reported red and square, square. In darkness, homogeneity is lacking, and hence vision also. Although stimula, kinesis, are spoken of, it is not made clear how the stimulus is delivered. And he's talking about Plato there. And then DeWitt says, according to Democritus, the intervening air served the purpose of a medium in vision, being shaped into images by the pulsation of the atoms in an object. And these images cause the sensation by falling upon the soft and moist surface of the pupil as upon a mirror. If the adoption of the air as the medium was occasioned by a fear that atoms of solid bodies might wound the delicate surface of the eye, we may well understand why Epicurus, in rejecting his master's teaching, dwells so positively upon the extreme filminess of the idols, which he represents all bodies as discharging. At the same time that he overcomes this difficulty, he gives the opinion that the stream of idols thrown off by the object itself accounts more satisfactorily for the precision of the image impressed upon the eye, as if by an engraved seal. So one of the background contexts we're dealing with here is apparently that Democritus and Plato had a very different position on how vision works.
It's hard. This one, I think it was interesting, but it doesn't, to me, have a lot more in it. So even though I didn't find it dry, I'm not sure what else to say about it. And maybe this is just a shorter podcast, despite the length of the passage.
Probably, Elaine, that's what I'll do. I'll bring the podcast to a close pretty quickly here today on these points, because I believe as soon as next week we get into the application of this information. And again, it gets back to the question of when can vision be trusted and when can it not be trusted? How do we check our observations against other visions and so forth? But while right now we're in the middle of the details, the application isn't there yet.
Yeah. The only other thing that I noticed in here that I forgot to mention in the second paragraph, and so when we strike a stone with our fingers, we touch the surface and outmost color of the stone, but then we feel nothing of the color or surface by our touch. We perceive no more than the hardness of the stone that lies within. Is that feel nothing of the color or surface, or the color of the surface? Because of course we feel texture. I'm thinking that he means that we don't feel the color. So I would like to say that, just as our tactile feeling of the shape of an object, our understanding of the three-dimensional presentation of an object correlates with our vision. And for some people, people who are blind in some cases, or people who've trained themselves by a form of echolocution, so they can hear sound bouncing off objects and understand their shapes, which is amazing. So there's not really the reason that we can't feel color, because the light has different wavelengths that's coming off an object. So there could be an organism, let me say, that could have a nervous system that could detect differences between wavelengths of light and correlate that with the visual color. We don't have that ability, but I can't think of any reason why it would be physiologically ruled out. So
That we could not, why it should be physiologically ruled out that we cannot touch color. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. So we don't have, I mean, so far as I know, humans don't have that ability, but I don't think that would be a fantastical thing to imagine there could be an organism that could develop that skill, just like, like you have bats and their sonar and so on. It seems possible to me that there could be a tactile sense which was so refined that it could detect differences in wavelengths of light. So I don't know that any such thing exists, but I would just say I don't think it'd be beyond possibility that it could evolve.
I think you're right, Elaine. I think I could see the possibility that color at some extremely small level is a function of the shape of...
Not the shape, but the wavelength of light.
The wavelength of light.
Yeah. When I was a kid, I was convinced that I could tell the difference between differently colored objects of the same shape with my eyes closed. And then my dad's the physicist said, "No, you can't." And
what you can do is by experience, if there is a difference in texture, it's not directly the color, but is for example, if the pigments gives the surface a different texture, that one you might be able to sense, and then you correlate it, and that means once you know this, you've trained for this, then you feel like you can sense that color with feeling.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Well, that would be interesting. Yeah. So that was the only other thing I noticed here.
Martin, at a atomic or very small level, does the wavelength that's reflected off of something have to do with the shape of the surface?
No. This is a molecular thing.
All right. Well, Charles, what else do you have for today? Anything?
No, it's just one of those sections again where I prefer to listen.
Okay. Hearing nothing further from anyone about the text today, I'm about to declare us finished for the day.
All right.
Unless anybody has any final thoughts.
Not me.
Yeah, no, not me either. Okay, very good. All right, well, we'll edit this podcast up and get it out, and then we'll come back to discuss images further next week. So thanks, everybody, and close for the day then.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
That's it. Thanks and bye.